It's fairly similar to your traditional performance appraisal process insofar as you're tracking through your performance over the course of the year. We have a mid-year check-in, which is not necessarily completely unique, but it gives the opportunity to assess a couple of things. Are my goals right? How am I tracking to my goals? What do I need in terms of support in order to achieve my goals by the end of the year? It's also the opportunity to talk about how I'm going about tracking to my goals. And it's a really key distinction. It's not just about what I'm achieving, it's about how I'm achieving it. And that's a clear communication here at SEEK.
Once a year is the formal performance rating that contributes to your salary review, and also proportion of profit share if we've hit our profit targets for the year. But informally, once a year, we check in at the halfway point to say, how are you tracking? What do you need to be focused on in order to get to the next rating by June? So how it works, it is based on 50% performance, so achievement to goals. How did you go tracking against your goals for the year? And then the other 50% is your demonstration of the values. And demonstration of the values consistently, not in the month leading up to performance reviews or a couple of days a week. It doesn't move that rating. It is you either did or you didn't. Your performance goals, though, there is a scale of that, from did you hit your targets to you went above and beyond to outstanding performance that was significantly above and beyond. What we're in the middle of now is actually mid-year review check-ins. So what we do is encourage employees to do a self-assessment. That gives them the chance to reflect on how they're progressing, what challenges they've faced, where they've developed, what more support they might need. You know, the business world moves so fast. Unless you're stopping and reflecting, what was I doing this time last year versus what am I doing today, you sometimes miss that there's been a huge amount of growth, and the types of work you're doing and the way you're doing it is a level above what you were doing last year. So there's a really good opportunity for reflection there. And then the manager does the same thing, forms their own assessment. They can use a 360 tool if they'd like to. And for all managers here, we use a 360 tool. 360 feedback is the opportunity to get a complete view of feedback. So for us, that is your manager's perspective, your own perspective in the middle, and the other people that you work with, your peers, stakeholders, clients, anyone that sees you from a non-manager relationship point of view, and then your direct reports if you manage people as well. So the complete circle of feedback should give you a really well-rounded view of feedback. Sometimes as a direct report, you have a different view of your manager than their manager has of them or their peers. Somebody once said to me that your peers only hear about the bad stuff because you're only ever telling them about the challenges you have. So it's good to get a completely different perspective from people and see they think that about me, but yet my manager thinks something completely different. Is that the way I'm communicating with them, or what does that suggest to me? And comparing it to your own self-assessment. So sometimes you can have a blind spot and not see things about yourself or your style, and sometimes you don't, and that can be good and bad. You don't know you have a strength until somebody points it out. So we use 360 here for all our managers, but anyone that works in project teams, we encourage them to use that as well, because it's not just their manager's opinion, it's the other people that they interact with day to day.
So performance management and appraisal, again, we would engage in a formal process at SEEK twice a year, but frankly, it's probably in action, every week. Really, the reality of it is that. So I think it all begins with setting really good goals. And then once the company's got really good goals, we would what's called waterfall, I suppose, those goals out through the organisation. So we'll turn company goals into departmental goals into management goals into team goals, and so on and so forth. It sounds really exhausting, but it's actually not. It's relatively simple. But what it means, the most important part and why we do it, is that individual, no matter who you are, where you are, you're getting very specific kind of goals that mean something to your job and that you're going to be able to have an effect. on to contribute to overall company success. So for me, that's where it begins. Really good goals that are meaningful. From then, it's kind of easy, frankly. It's easier once you've got the goal and you know what you're working towards. With any of my direct reports, we can have really frank discussions, if need be day to day, but probably more likely week to week. How are you going with X, Y, Z, A, B, and C? And we would be that specific. So, from a set of team goals or individual goals, we'll have quarterly goals that are delivered each quarter, funnily enough, to everyone, and then everyone would go away and break those quarterly goals into their weekly and daily tasks so that they're working towards each of those. So I think the definition pretty much of what you're working towards and why, and is it meaningful to you, but then the accountability, so to make sure you're doing it and do what you say you're going to do is one of our little mottos around here. I think it's under the action value, but really that's what it is. So if I'm having a discussion with someone 3 and 4 weeks ago about something they said they'd do 1 and 2 weeks ago, then that's my management challenge for that person, to hold them accountable and make sure that task is getting done. So I guess I said it's a relatively simple process, and I think most people are bought into that because typically most people are going to want to know really clearly what does success look like and why, and what can I do to help. And if I hold them accountable once we've defined all that, then that should be a bit of a recipe for success.
The manager's keen to understand whether or not they're the right goals, measuring the right type of changes across the business to match up with the strategy of the business, and the employee is obviously being charged with whatever it is that they need in order to be successful in meeting their goals and meeting their targets. It's really important for the growth of every employee, the growth of every person, to be able to clearly measure and articulate what they've achieved over a year. To come in and do the same thing day in and day out and not ever see any change is not something that we actually encourage here at Seek. We want to see change. We want to see people being passionate, building on their strengths, building on their skills, and able to clearly, at the end of the year, turn around and say, wow, look what I've achieved over this year, look what I've learned over this year, and look at the impact that I'm having on the entire business meeting the strategy. And that's really our approach to performance management.
When I first started to Seek, there was 4 values, and you started first day at your desk. You've got the 4 values written up on your desk. There was honesty, ownership, teamwork, and passion. This year we've implemented a new value, which is action as well. And certainly each year, every 6 months, you get evaluated against how you've lived those values on a 6-month basis, and then every 12 months you get reviewed, and it goes towards performance-based salary recognition. Every 12 months you get your profit share, which goes against what rating you got. So it's a certain percentage of your wage, and you get above target, it's 5% of that or something like that, and you get that money every 12 months, which is good. So it's quite an important piece, your synergy rating, and quite dear to a lot of people's hearts because it obviously speaks to the pocket.
Feedback we would have, again, we have sessions every 6 months, but again, the feedback loop is super frequent these days. It could be daily, if we had someone on performance management, it literally could be daily in terms of how they're performing to whatever it might be. It could be a value, it could be, a set KPI that they've been chasing, number of calls executed today. So, typically it can be really frequent, or it can be, look, I wouldn't want, anything less than for my guys, fortnightly probably, depending on the task. But the feedback loop and the coaching loop is so incredibly important here. We've got an underlying belief that you're simply not going to get better at something if you're not receiving feedback on coaching on something. So, if anyone I worked for hadn't had coaching in 2 weeks, then I'd be a little worried, because I'd be wondering how they were going to become much better at that skill. So, formally and informally, and by formal I mean a sit-down meeting over an hour and a half, and everything's documented twice a year. And informally, hey, that could be in the car on the way back from a meeting. It could be over a sandwich. It could be anything. So, and everything in between, pretty much.
We've actually started experimenting with a really short tool that we just built on Outlook. It's a form that allows managers to pick from a drop-down list of questions, only a handful. So in theory, if you know your people really well, you only need to ask a few questions, not 25. And more importantly, it asks for their strengths, what they did really well, and is there anything they need to develop in. So the manager takes responsibility for giving that feedback. They don't print out a report and give it to the employee and allow them to understand it. They understand it first, interpret it, and then give the feedback as their own, which I think is really important. So then together they have a performance conversation. How's the year gone? What did you find? Here's what I've observed, and agree on a rating. In terms of challenges, I probably alluded to it earlier in that in an ideal world you'd have regular feedback and not wait for once a year. I think the ongoing challenge that HR has, and probably more importantly managers have, is when you get to the end of the year and the employee has a completely different view of their year than you do. And that's not news to anybody, and we all review our own work differently. But sometimes it's a big gulf. So I actually think you could be bordering on below target. I haven't seen a lot of demonstration of the values, or your performance hasn't been up to scratch, and the employee thinks they're absolutely role modelling and things are great. And that only comes down to not receiving regular enough feedback or not having really clear goals up front. Sometimes a combination of the two.
Managing performance can be challenging. I think probably what I would struggle with most with my guys is, I guess, opinions or vagaries. I think I've learnt my lesson over time. As specific as we can possibly be about setting a task, we'll be happy in the end, much happier in the end. I think where I've caught myself up and people that work for me in the past has been we haven't been specific enough around what our goals were, and so therefore the definition of what success looks like is cloudy, or it's different for me. For whatever reason, the walk away or the takeaway for that person is different to what I feel it was. So when you come to differences of opinion, I suppose, that can be quite challenging, and that can be on any type of goal. On the values specifically, that can be quite a challenge as well, because sometimes they're hard to manage. Some people's definition of what honesty is, for example, can be a little different to what my definition is. But the same rule applies. If at the beginning you set really clear examples of what we all mean by honesty or by teamwork or ownership or passion or action, then we really can't go too far wrong. The rest, and something that I've found helps also, is then call it acting as if, really, acting out myself. So if I want to see a particular behaviour exhibited in my people relating to honesty, then it's obviously up to me to lead from the front on that and to make sure they get a really clear example of what we all mean by that. But really, to avoid any nasty mistakes or nasty conversations down that end, it's just a matter of being really specific and clear up front and make sure we all agree.